Barton Crockett is a media analyst at Lazard Capital Markets. He has a buy on News Corp. He believes the scandal won't affect earnings. He is joining us now from Kansas City. Barton, thanks for joining us this morning. Eric just went down that list of advertisers, and there are more even that have agreed to suspend their business from the newspapers, from Rupert Murdoch's newspapers. You're not worried at all about the effect that this could have on the bottom line?
No, because the newspaper, News of the World, is pretty immaterial to News Corp's earnings, in the circa 1% range. So really whatever happens there is a flea on the back of an elephant. News Corp is a company that's really driven by their TV networks in the U.S. and internationally. And that part of the story is very strong right now.
Speaking of TV, though, I mean, as Eric mentioned as well, this could hurt Murdoch's takeover of B-Sky B. So that does speak to a larger part of the company's revenue.
Right. Well, you asked about earnings, and, at this point, they don't own B-Sky B. We're hoping that they're able to complete a takeover of B-Sky B because we think that would be accretive. But we haven't baked that into our buy assumption or into our estimates. But that's the bigger fallout. It's not what happens to earnings at News of the World. But, does the political furor over this really, terrible headlines that we're reading cause the government to delay the approval of the transaction? It's hard to believe. We were expecting the approval to be, handed down basically this week. And now all of this stuff erupts. And, and that's troubling. It's surprising. I still think we're more looking at a delay as opposed to, the transaction not going through. But, the headlines are terrible, and it's hard to really make sense of what's going on.
Barton, should we think about this scandal in broader terms? I was just looking at a compilation that The Guardian pulled together of all the denials and dismissals that News Corp executives have made in connection with this scandal going back to 2007. Now, I can't help but notice that James Murdoch was running News Corp in Europe, and he was the chairman of News International going back to 2007 until earlier this year. Doesn't this, at the end of the day, come back to him?
Okay. Well, I don't want to, be, a Nancy Grace and try and predict, guilt or innocence in a situation like this. The police have investigated this.
Barton, I'm not asking you to be Nancy Grace. I'm not asking you to predict. I'm pointing out that News Corp, since 2007, says that it investigated the phone hacking. Now, we know that there was much more hacking than was initially acknowledged by News Corp, than was initially discovered by News Corp. We know that now beyond a shadow of a doubt. News Corp has acknowledged as much. So what does it say about News Corp's executives? What does it say about News Corp's management that they allegedly conducted a thorough investigation, said that they'd found no evidence of wrongdoing, and now have proven to be absolutely wrong?
Okay. Well, perhaps the investigation wasn't as thorough as it could have been or should have been. But that doesn't speak to the broader question in my mind of, whether there's some type of bigger culpability. I mean, you can make a mistake. You can, not understand that people were doing stuff that they shouldn't have been doing, and perhaps you should have understood that. That's one question, but the bigger question, I think, is a legal one and a regulatory one. And I can't really speak to the legal one. The regulatory one, looks like one and more of a delay. Is there a bigger issue here with News Corp executives? What I see are people that are very talented at running a business. I see a scandal that's really kind of, unparalleled. At this point, I'm really focusing on the fact that these guys are great businessmen, and I think the investigation will have to play out, and we'll have to see from there.
Barton, does it make you lose confidence at all, though, in the management, if not in Rupert Murdoch, in perhaps some of his deputies, to the extent that, as Eric made the point, I mean, they have tons of resources. If they wanted to do an internal investigation that was complete, you can't say that they don't have enough money or manpower to do it.
Well, one thing they've said yesterday is that they're doing another internal investigation. They've appointed Joel Klein. They're going to look at this, more deeply. If everything we're reading is true, and again, that's a big if. I'm not going to try and pretend I know exactly what the truth of the matter is. But, if everything they say is true, clearly, there were some errors made at some level in News Corp. I don't know how high. I do know that these guys are great businessmen, and I do know that everything that we're reading out of the UK government would suggest that this would be contained to a question of, approval of B-Sky B and timing of that, more so than anything else.
Barton, before we go, I just want to, if I may, try to draw a parallel here with, of all things, Goldman Sachs. Going into the financial crisis, nobody would have denied that the people running Goldman Sachs were great businessmen. Lloyd Blankfein, a great businessman. Hank Paulson, a great businessman, going back decades. But what Goldman failed to see was a certain kind of risk, a political risk, that it ultimately came to recognize as a result of actions regulators took against its mortgage operations. Is it not possible that something similar is going on in News Corp here, that they're great businessmen, but they don't recognize these risks that potentially can mushroom out of control? We don't know what's going to happen in the UK, but it is fair to say that everybody from the Prime Minister on down is steaming mad.
Okay. Sure, people are steaming mad, but, there's two questions here. One is, should they have done something differently? The other is, what impact is this going to have on the business and on the stock? You look at a company like Goldman Sachs, I don't know that company. I do, read that, perhaps you could take exception to a lot of things that happen there. I don't know, but, it's still a great company. A News Corp, may have to go through a process here, but this is a very large, very successful company. I think looking at the bigger picture, it's very hard to bet against these guys.
Barton, we thank you so much for the time. Barton Crockett, he is an analyst at Lazard Capital Markets, joining us there from Kansas City.